Welcome back to another episode of EventHubs Talk and Block. I am John Catalyst Gray, and with me as always is John Velociraptor Guerrero.
What's up, team? There's a lot to talk about today. So we are, first of all, visited by Steven Dream King Chavez because there's a lot to talk about today. What's up, Steven?
Not much, man. Chilling. Ready to do this.
Right on. Right on. So Street Fighter 6. It is not to say that we're right around the corner from Season 2, but we're getting close, and conversations are very much about what needs to change in this game, what's overpowered, how do we go about balancing it, how do we discuss balance so that it trickles up to the developers, and there's plenty of those conversations going on right now. We wanted to take a slightly different approach to it and try to figure out what in this game gives a character the most oomph, the most juice. What aspects, like if you're good at this, like something like Drive Rush, then you're probably going to thrive. And if we understand those aspects of this game, and to the degree that we understand those, I think it's easier to balance at a more fundamental level. So we're going to be talking about the best tools to have and why, and then maybe how we would go about altering those if we were Capcom so that Street Fighter 6 is awesomer in Season 2. So, without that out of the way, the first one has got to be Drive Rush. You can't talk about changing and balancing Street Fighter 6 without talking about Drive Rush.
I initially said way back in the beta that Drive Rush needed to be 1.5 bars, and I actually take that back entirely now. You guys called it well. You guys are like, no, that's a bad idea. Don't do that. Because it's going to break a lot of characters like DJ, Jury, Aki. It's fundamentally going to change the game in ways I don't think is a good idea. However, what I would do with this move is I would change the damage scaling on it when you do the raw Drive Rush. I would increase the damage scaling by 5 to 10% because this move dominates the game in a way that's a bit unhealthy for the resources that are required to use it. For a 1-bar move in neutral and for how difficult it is to react to it, I would very heavily change the risk reward for this move by basically, it doesn't cost anymore, it's the same cost, but basically the reward that you get from it is diminished. And I'm really curious like how that strikes both of you guys by basically, and again, this is a universal nerf to every character in the game that when you do a raw Drive Rush from neutral, you're getting 5 to 10% less damage on it. How does that strike you guys?
Interesting. Steven, I want to hear you first.
I just got through, I think last week, writing a story about a story for the front page of EventHubs about how I think that Capcom should target character-specific balance changes before tweaking the general mechanics. It's on the front page. You guys can check it out if you're keen. But
we'll link to it too in the description of this video.
Sweet, yeah, some YouTube editing magic there. I think that if I did have to go with a general change like that, damage scaling's probably the one that I would go with, or it would be high up on the list. But I do still have concerns with that in the sense of like, if that's all that changes, some of the characters' Drive Rushes are still really ridiculously good, and then the lower end characters are still getting less off of it anyway. So I'm a little bit iffy on that, but I think that's a comfortable place to start exploring if we're going to look at general mechanic changes and overall general mechanic changes. I think that's probably a pretty good place to start, though I do still have some concerns about it.
When any of these conversations about changing Drive Rush in particular have come up, there is always that ripple effect because it's so embedded into so many aspects of this game. So we're very right, first of all, to consider if we change this, is this going to have an effect way over there that we don't immediately see, and will that turn the game on its head? Damage doesn't tend to affect those things as much because it's kind of just input-output. It's not the utility of the whole thing. It's more like you have to do it again in order to win the round. So you have to hit them 3 times instead of 2, or 4 times instead of 3. And so I do like the alteration of damage, or in this case, the scaling from that point of view. I don't think that this would turn Street Fighter 6 on its head. That said, and you guys got into this a little bit, it's not necessarily a global problem. It's more a problem amongst certain characters. And to Steven's point, if I'm a Lily player, again to Steven's point, then and I'm also getting less damage out of when I do use my Drive Rush, it's like, does that nerf need to come in here, or is that complicating things as well? Now, can you only nerf damage scaling, say, on like DJ and Jury, maybe 1 or 2 other characters that have the best Drive Rushes in the game? I don't know about that, but I do agree that this would be a place to explore. I'm just worried that it might nerf other characters. As far as Drive Rush on the whole, it is doing too much, in my opinion. And I think you were kind of getting at this too, John, because not only does it zip through, it's like an enhanced dash that zips. I don't think it skips neutral, although kind of, depending on the character. But not only does it quickly move you in and potentially engage, it also gives you benefit on both block and hit, so harder hitting combos and better pressure if they block or they get hit. And then it also, you can cancel out of it at a bunch of different ranges. And this is my main issue as far as I can see Drive Rush right now, is that it in and of itself becomes a mix-up. And players that are ready, and this might be more just for those really long-reaching Drive Rushes and really fast ones, Jury DJ, that even when I know that this DJ player or this Jury player wants to Drive Rush and they're showing the signs and they're at the range, and I'm going, all my mental stack is focused in on stopping this attempt to get in. They do it, and I'm ready for it with my anti-Drive Rush button. Well, the Jury can just cut the Drive Rush short with maybe a standing medium kick instead of all the way in and go to, crouching medium kick.
Bro, I know a Drive Rush is coming. I know it's coming. I know it's coming. I'm gonna stop it. I'm stopping it right now. This game's garbage, bro.
In and of itself, it's so useful that and it has so many ways of going about it. It's so flexible that it becomes a mix-up. And pile on all the rest of, but she could also jump, or she could just do a regular dash, or she could just do nothing, or she could use, fireball or a forward-moving special. And it's just, well, this goes into something else where we'll talk about mental stack. Drive Rush adds too much mental stack for those that are really, really good with it. Then I think it should. Now, is there a flat out answer there? No. My first answer goes, well, make those characters or make Drive Rush so that you have to go a certain distance before you can cancel it. But does that open up cans of worms in other arenas? I don't know.
It's interesting because like the issue that you're presenting there, like I fully understand it and I can totally see it, but also that's an aspect of this game that I kind of like as well, because yes, there is that mix-up, but also it's the you can throw in some stuff yourself as well kind of thing. It's a how well do you know what this tactic can do, and how well do you know your opponent. And like I use short Drive Rush to bait stuff all the time, and it's super effective, and it's something that it's like I like that little meta game of this game, because it's like it's just the one-upping each other, right? It's like, oh, I know that you want to do this, I know the guy wants to EX or OD flash kick me on wake up, let me cut it short just outside of his range, get a wind clad, stocked up, and then punish him, right? Like to be able to do that as well is kind of cool, but I also see how people could have issue with it. For me personally, I don't think I have issue with it because I like the back and forth of that. I like that idea of like we can keep just kind of going back and forth, and it's my knowledge over yours, it's my read over yours, and let's see what happens kind of thing. It is very bombastic, but I kind of like it. I don't know.
And you're saying that in the context of Jury and DJ, of like when you're playing against those characters.
Sure. It can work if I'm on the offense and stuff, but again, I with that article that I wrote, those two characters and Drive Rush specifically were the two things I pointed out of like these characters need to have their Drive Rushes analyzed and reworked because they get too much. They just get too much. So in that sense, I'd probably scale them back.
This universal change would apply to everyone. So, John, you were talking about Lily, like, so Lily does get less off of her Drive Rush with this, but also she's getting hit less by Drive Rush as well, or at least when she is getting hit by Drive Rush, it is doing less damage. So
Lily's not coast to coasting with her Drive Rush. Right. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? Like she might already kind of function this way to begin with because she's only going so far. These other characters have so much more with their Drive Rush because they go so far so quickly that all of that distance becomes something that they can use that a character like Lily with a shorter Drive Rush can't even use to begin with, isn't even in that conversation really. So Yeah, go ahead.
In a big jump out thing here is in terms of drive rush cancels, the ones that take 3 bars, like where you cancel from a move, I would not change those at all. The 3 bar thing there is a very important distinction here, is because 3 bars is just a ton in this game. So if you want that privilege, like I don't think that is balanced improperly at all right now. I think that it's actually really well done as it is right now. It's just the raw drive rush that it takes 1 bar. I've always kind of been like, man, that's a lot of reward for not much risk in the grand scheme of things, and especially again, as you guys have mentioned, with a jury or a DJ. In addition to that, I think that Capcom might individually look at a few other characters' drive rushes and be like, maybe we'll tone this down just slightly, and maybe just like the distance or something like that for those characters. But yeah, I think that overall that drive rush, like they talk so much about like drive impact and drive parry and all this other kind of stuff being like just as good, like whatever style you want to play as you can do. Like to me, drive rush really kind of stands out, especially in the neutral raw drive rush. It stands out as kind of like the best option for a lot of characters when we're playing the game. And it's like, man, that drive impact isn't really competing with that, and I don't know. So to me, it feels like drive rush just needs a slight tone down, like overall. And I think the game would be better for it. A little less random, a little less scrubby.
Do you feel like outside of those 2 characters, there are a lot of characters who you experience negative feelings of frustration because of their drive rushes or because of drive rush tactics from them?
I don't think specific characters really stand out to me. I think it's kind of more of a, I would like the game to be a little bit more thoughtful and a little less like, let me throw some spaghetti out the wall and see what sticks. And that's what Drive Rush feels like a lot right now, is kind of like a, hey, let's, I hope this works. And I mean, again, I'm an Aki player, so I do Drive Rush like 50 times a match, like it's a nonstop thing for me, but making it a little more calculated because you don't get as much reward for it, I don't think that's a bad thing to add to this game kind of collectively. It's going to slow the game down a little bit. So I get why Capcom would be worried about that, because if you're not getting as much reward, there's less incentive to do it. At the same time, we're talking about a 5 or 10% damage scaling thing. That's not horrible. And right now, as is, both versions of Drive Rush have a 15% damage scaling on them right now.
So they already scale.
They already scale. They already scale at 15%, both of them. Yeah.
So, I'm still a little bit concerned about an overall damage reduction, but how does the idea of punish counter state for punishing a raw drive rush strike you guys? Because that could also be the way of like, hey, look, like I can risk it. I can risk this and I can throw it out for, only a bar of drive gauge. But if my opponent reads it, I'm taking a lot more damage now. And that could get people to be like, hey, it still works the same way, but I need to think twice about just throwing it out, because if I have an opponent that knows how to counter this, I'm getting punish countered now. That's way different than just, a quick poke or like a quick confirm. That's pretty different. So what do you guys think of that idea?
It does something. It does something without really changing the utility of it all. That said, though, yeah. It's just that here's my problem with global change to this, is that it doesn't have, Drive Rush doesn't have the same utility for all characters. And the problematic parts of it is when it has too much utility, and that tends to be only with a few characters. So the more I look at this, I wouldn't be overly upset to see global change to it, especially if it's not utility, on the utility factor. But I really do think this needs to be a DJ, jury, and maybe another character or 2, but definitely those 2 kind of alterations. See where we're at, see if we feel a little bit better about Drive Rush at that point. And to those, I would just say, other characters don't have it as fast, they don't have it as far. Maybe just tune those back a little bit so that Drive Rush is not in and of itself a mix-up for those characters, so that if I'm looking for it, I can stuff it more consistently, because this game is so much of, you need to be able to look at the right thing at the right time while your opponent tries to throw too many things and cloud that decision for you. Drive Rush shouldn't do it by itself. It should be 1 juggling pin, not 6. Damage scaling, which is kind of what we were discussing already.
Get into that one as well. Yeah,
John, maybe this is kind of connected here. What are your thoughts on damage scaling?
So damage scaling is one of the main ways I think Capcom will rebalance Street Fighter 6. And I actually, when the patch notes come out here in a couple months, I expect to see the line damage scaling adjusted probably about 100 times. We've seen that a few times in the past here with prior games. And just to give people an example of this is that like Luke has a 20% startup scaling on his crouching medium kick, and Kin's standing heavy kick has a 30% starter scaling on that. And so damage scaling is actually on a per move basis in Street Fighter 6. That's unlike any other previous Street Fighter game that we've had.
They went in on this game. They paid attention to everything. Very minute details.
Yeah, and so, but some moves don't have any damage scaling at all. And I would actually expect Capcom to add some stuff like in that regard, especially for something like Luke's crouching medium punch. Like of all the moves in the game to not have damage scaling, that thing has nothing on it, and so it hits like a truck. So when you start getting into like the per character changes, I personally expect to see damage scaling just all up and down, especially for moves that are super spammable or like give a super high reward for not much risk. And again, Luke's crouching medium punch is just a huge standout example to me of where I think Capcom is going to like individually look at stuff, and those patch notes are just going to be like nothing but that line, practically, or 90% that line. So.
Well, because like we've said, so many things have been thought of in the context of other things, and we don't want to have that butterfly effect mess up the game. When you just change the damage, that's not touching any of that. And we've had this amount of time to see what floats to the top. Crouching medium punch from Luke. Okay, that move has so much. How do you balance it? Well, let's throw a few little weights on the other side of the scale that's only going to hit it in this one way. I love that. And I think that Capcom, like you're getting at, has very much set themselves up for success in the balancing realm, or at least given themselves a nice buffer zone to explore and say, we'll just tweak down the damage and we'll do it this way. And yeah, I really like that. Steven, thoughts on scaling?
Yeah, I think it's pretty common between vanilla versions of Street Fighter games and Capcom fighting games in general to the next updated version that we see a damage reduction, just kind of for a lot of things. That seems to be the natural order. Capcom and the designers, the developers put this stuff together, and they don't know how it's going to play out. So they have damage ratings and things to the best of their abilities put into the game, and then it kind of plays out, and you go, oh, we didn't realize that Luke's crouching medium punch is ridiculous and really, really good and does a ton of damage, right? Like with the combos and stuff. So I think that we're going to see damage reductions for sure. And on a per character basis, I definitely think that's a good idea. I still, again, I'm very cautious about doing sweeping general overall changes to this game because everything is so interconnected and so intricately interconnected that it's like any change that's sweeping like that is going to really, really change the way this game is played, which could be good, but also the foundation we have is already very, very solid. So I'm scared to mess with that when, again, we see so many of these, the biggest complaints coming from some of the best characters in the game, and you go, okay, like, they don't represent the entire mechanic. DJ and Jury don't represent the entire drive rush mechanic, right? It's like, but we have characters that you can point at that you go, well, this character gets way too much from it, etc. So I think damage scaling is definitely going to be something that's going to come into play. I don't see how Capcom doesn't do it, but I still think it should be on a character basis for sure.
Yeah, I'm sort of surprised that a move like Luke's crouching medium punch didn't have that preemptive damage scaling attached to it. John, is there a quick way?
John, are you really surprised about that? This is Luke we're talking about here.
Yeah, maybe it was on purpose. John, is there a quick way
Alex
that people
is much better.
Can look up and see the specific scaling for each normal attack?
On the official frame data page on Street Fighter 6's website, you can see the damage scaling on every single attack from drive rush to everything in the game. There's two main types that you see, and that's combo scaling and then starter scaling. And they're both different. Like a starter only applies a scale when that's your opening move in a combo. And then there's a multiplier combo scaling, and there might be other ones in there that I don't know of, and Capcom certainly could add more. I'm not 100% sure how the multiplier one works, but take a guess that it's just some kind of math formula they throw at that to make it, scale more damage.
The starter scaling stuff is so interesting too, because now we're seeing kind of what these characters, everybody can do in the game and stuff. And like you said, John, you were saying like some of this stuff is floating to the top now, and you're seeing like more of these moves and stuff. They're like, oh, this is JP's best normal, this is Luke's best normal, or whatever, and this is the party starter, right? So it's interesting to see that and go, well, Capcom now has like examples of things that should have that starter scaling, and you want to prioritize the starter scaling on moves that are the most effective, and then not have it on moves that are harder to hit and harder to open up with like certain heavy punches and things like that, right? So it's an interesting kind of dynamic of how they're balancing stuff, but definitely gives them some ideas of where to start, I think, when you go into the balance for season 2.
The next one is corner carry. And I actually had a little bit of reservation about this because I go, well, sure, corner carry is really nice for rushdown characters, your Kens, your Juries, your Lukes. But I was like, I'm a JP player and I really like putting people in the corner as a zoning character. I think everybody kind of loves putting people in the corner, especially because throw loops are so prominent in this game. Corner has always been a place of advantage/disadvantage in fighting games generally because you lose the ability to move backwards. But in this game, it's even worse because one of the main mechanics, drive impact, is enhanced in the corner. So with that all in mind, it's a really, really strong tool to be able to carry someone to that corner. In fact, with Marissa, we see that baked into her Super 3 because that's calculated and that's what they want to give her as a reward for that because of how she works. Fair enough. But when you've got a top tier character, arguably the best in the game, Ken, touching you once from round one fight and, Tatsuing you all the way into the corner where he is not only got the normal corner advantages that everyone has, but he extra loves the corner because he's a rushdown crazy character, has those throw loops to make it even scarier. The ability to just take you there, and as people have figured out by burning extra drive gauge and doing like 2 revolutions of drive gauge cancels, drive rush cancels, and pushing you all the way there, then they've got setups. That's just so good. It can really steamroll you. And again, without that damage scaling stuff that we've talked about, it's pretty intense right now. So corner carry, how do we go about changing that around a little bit so that it's so that the game feels more balanced? I'll turn it over to you first, Steven.
Yeah, you mentioned a really interesting distinction because I think every character can probably corner carry decently in this game with the right resources. But you have characters like Ken that don't need to spend a ton of resources and they still get ridiculous corner carry, and that's the stuff we need to look at. So I have no problem if you're putting in the resources, and we're going to get into this later with resource management and stuff. I have no problem with having characters with really good corner carry if you have to put up the resources. If you're wasting like 4-5 bars of drive gauge to get somebody cornered, that seems fair to me. But again, we've got characters like Ken and JP and Luke that they can just kind of get your character cornered and they don't have to put up a lot of resources, and they also get like optimal situations for Oki and things like that in the case of Ken and Luke, right, without sacrificing too much, and that's what we kind of need to look at here. So I think that it's okay to have really good corner carry just as long as you put up the correct amount of resources to do it, because this game is so tied to resource management and you should get a good payoff for spending a lot, right? Like that's generally what we should be seeing with the design of this game. But you just have characters that get so much without having to spend a lot, and then they get to maintain their pressure. And you've got Ken who just cornered you and he used 1 bar of meter and he's fully stocked, he's got level 3, now you're cornered, now he gets better juggles, he can open you up with overheads and lows and run fakes and all these things, and it's like, man, that's so much to have for one character. Like, but if you shorten how, maybe how far his Tatsu goes when he combos with it or something, or, make some kind of a distinction there or a change there that makes him sacrifice something in exchange for corner carry, not also just getting like really good damage and corner carry for like very little meter usage. So I think, again, it's very character specific here because there's some characters just get way too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ken, by the way, also if he hits you when he's cornered, has pretty easy combos to side switch with you too. Yeah.
Dude,
a couple of characters have that.
Yeah, I saw Tokido and Chris Wong playing, and Tokido had Chris Wong cornered. It was Ken versus Luke. Had him cornered. Chris Wong was cornered. He got the counter DI, and I was like, okay, maybe he's gonna like do a cool little side switch combo or something, or maybe a back throw because I play Lily. That's all I get, right? Mm-hmm. But no, he's just like, I'm just gonna do a regular drive rush combo with juggles, and he got Tokido to the complete other side, and it was like he was just shy of the corner. I'm like, dude, that's ridiculous. Like, and he still had like 3 drive gauge bars left, and it's like, come on, man. Like, he was like, I don't even care. I can get him all the way to the other side, no problem. I'm Luke. I don't care. Crouching medium punch. Let's go, right? So yeah, some characters get way too much. Frames.
Yeah. So Velociraptor talked about this, and I just want to highlight it again, that being in the corner in Street Fighter 6 is the absolute worst place to be in any Street Fighter game I've ever seen. Like, that is the absolute nightmare scenario, and that's saying something in this franchise, because you don't want to be in the corner in any Street Fighter game, but this game is just, it takes it up to 11. And so the ability to push people into there and do like side switch combos and all this other kind of stuff, it's so powerful in this game. And we saw this in the previous game, Street Fighter V, where G and Akuma, they had their ability to push people to the corner decreased, and also that their side switch combos didn't get all the damage and whatnot. You didn't get, but why not everything, basically, is what the rule with Akuma, right? Like it's do you have to choose? No, you don't have to choose anything, just do it, and it works out great, right? And so I want to see a little bit more of a conscientious effort from Capcom, that if side switch combos exist, that the damage that you're getting from that, and maybe the Okazemi that you're getting from that, is not all that great, and that you have to go specifically and tune certain moves. Like they adjusted Akuma's like Tatsu in Street Fighter V, basically to give him less side switch ability and less damage and whatnot. And with G, I think there was like less pushback on a handful of his moves, so he couldn't just take you corner to corner as easily, and that makes a big difference. Being directly in the corner or being like 10 steps out of it is a gigantic difference in this game. And I would really like to see Capcom very specifically attend to corner carry stuff, especially with characters like Ken. It feels way too much for Ken to have that on top of everything else that he has.
And that would be achieved through knockback in his hits, or it would be achieved, like, okay.
Yeah,
because that starts to get into, well, does that mess with his combos?
So it shouldn't mess with his combos, because basically you're dictating in the properties of the game how far his Dragon Punch will push back, or how far his Tatsu will move him forward and push the opponent back and stuff like that. Specifically his Tatsu would be the big one to look at, but yes.
Watch him get way better Oki now mid-screen because he doesn't get pushed back as far.
Oh man.
It's not easy. It's not easy.
It's not.
That's why and also, to your point with Akuma, I would have thought it would be funny if he had a DLC costume that cost $20, but it was just like a T-shirt that said "Por qué no los dos?"
Por qué no los dos?
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking when John brought that up, by the way.
Right? Why not both? The fourth category that makes a character especially good if they excel here is resource management. John, what do you have to say about resource management in SF6?
Okay, so characters who don't have to spend as many resources to get high damage are already shifting to the top of the tier list, and fighters like Lily and Aki, who demand a lot of resources to get heavy damage, are going down the list. So for example, if you see a fighter who's constantly burning themselves out to land their big combos, their ability to naturally manage resources is not very good. And I can see this aspect being tweaked a bit, where characters like JP can juggle with stuff like his standing heavy punch or his cane attacks right now, and maybe limiting this more to his OD moves or drive rush, where if he wants to juggle, he has to spend resources to get that same kind of stuff. I think that would kind of even the odds here a little bit, because you look at a character like Lily and it's like, you get 3 win stocks, you get all this other kind of stuff, and she spends all of her OD gauge, and she gets really good damage and really good Oki at that point in time, but she's got to spend, she's got to cash out. She's got
to stock those too.
Yeah,
so she's got to stock, and then she's got to get the hit, and then she's got to get the execution, which in this game is tough. Anyways,
so getting juggles without having to consume resources is a major advantage, and that's one of the main things I would look at here in terms of resource management, because you look at some characters like JP and stuff like that, and they can do this massive damage, 50%, 60% of your health, and they're still sitting there with 3 or 4 bars left by the time that they're done, and it's man, that is a very distinct difference between that character and a few of the other ones that get this kind of stuff versus some of the lower tier characters. And it seems like, to me, a major sore thumb that Capcom could easily address by just saying, hey, if you want to juggle or you want to get these very long combos, you have to spend resources at this point in time. You can't get this for free. You can't get this without spending.
Steven?
Yeah, I've been preaching resource management from very early on. It is so very important to this game to just be aware of where your resources are at, where your opponents are, how close they are to burnout, what's the best option. Do I want to go for damage? Do I want to force them into burnout? Do I want to use my level 3 early to get them to burnout, or just to recover my own gauge? There are so many interactions where it is just unbelievably important. And I think that is one of the big things here when we talk about the top tiers. It's again, their ability to kind of get their optimal game plan going with very little resource usage, or not having to use a lot of resources to do it. And you know, as Catalyst was saying, like some of those characters have definitely floated to the top already. I think you could say that easily about the top 3 characters like DJ, you know, Jury. All these characters kind of have that very similarly. But of course, the big 3 have it more than probably anybody. And funny that they happen to be the big 3, right? It's like, well, there's probably a correlation between those two things, I'd say for sure.
Yeah, I don't know about Big 3 anymore, but that's a different video for a different day. Now, it's interesting. Everything that we've talked about and the next thing that we're going to talk about are all pretty intertwined, right? So we're talking resource management now, but that very easily goes into, well, I think about Ken and I think about his corner carry. And right now, one of the ways he can carry you to the corner is comboing into, I think, regular Tatsu and just carries you horizontally. And maybe implementing some of what we've been talking about practically for this character might look like, okay, so to do that, he's got to land his OD Tatsu. And at that point, that's the corner carry move. And like that sounds like a lot of change for the character. So maybe that's not the specific alteration you want to make at this point, but something along those lines. You force these characters to spend more resources for the utility of these things. Or, you know, we were talking earlier about Drive Rush maybe having more damage scaling. Okay, so it's got a lot of utility. Let's etch away a little bit at the damage side of things, but all of these are touching each other: damage scaling, drive rush, corner carry, resource management, and this all spills over also into mental stack, which is the big foundational part of how the back and forth of this game gets explored and is established. You have all of these juggling pins to throw at your opponent. Are they going to be ready when you actually commit to one? Are they going to be looking at that? Are they going to be ready for that? Mental stack is our 5th aspect of this. And I suppose that this continues into some characters are more able to throw more juggling pins without committing resources, without risking themselves than other characters. But that's how I see mental stack. John, how do you see the mental stack situation?
Yeah, the mental stack in fighting games is a big one, and in Street Fighter 6 in particular, I think that having pokes and neutral that are special cancelable, that you can go to like DI and other stuff like that, is a huge advantage in this game, where you're not having to worry about like, hey, if I hit my standing medium punch or whatever, I could be DI'd and stuff from this because it's special cancelable. The characters that have that kind of stuff, like Ken's crouching medium kick, Luke's crouching medium kick, it's such a huge advantage to have that in neutral in this game. And when you have those type of moves, you have a much easier time playing neutral than other characters in the game, and that's where I'd like to see Capcom attend to this stuff maybe a little bit more. Where it's like, you know, if you're playing Lily in neutral, like your standing medium punch is kind of like one of your main pokes, but it's not special cancelable. You can't do much with it. It's like 10 frames of startup, and you compare that to other characters, and it's a night and day difference. And so that's where I kind of see the mental stack coming in, where it's like, my character, you know, the lower tier characters are so much harder to play than some of the higher tier characters in this game, especially like characters like Luke and Ken. I think are very easy to play and compared to like, you know, some of the more technical characters. I would really like to see Capcom kind of just universally tone these characters down a little bit, because when I'm not having to think about defense, when I'm not having to think about like, oh, you might do this or might do that, I'm able to open you up way more often because I'm able to focus on offense, I'm able to focus on whip punishing, I'm able to do all this kind of stuff that I don't have to worry about now because I've picked the right character on the select screen. And so that's where I would go with it mainly.
So people talk about the mental stack thing. I'll just talk about it generally. People speak about the mental stack thing as like, sometimes they say it's a problem in the sense of like overall, right? Like, oh, Street Fighter 6 just, there's so much going on. It's like mentally exhausting to play, and it's all these things, right? But again, that's another aspect of this game that I really like, especially coming from Street Fighter 5, where I felt everything was so much more limited. Like having the ability to go, oh, like I know there's so much to think about here, but I love that I can think about that and have a solution and see a solution right away and be able to work on it and adapt and then know about it for next time, right? So I think generally mental stack for Street Fighter 6, like I like it. I like the idea of it. But again, when we go back to specific characters and top tiers and things like that, again, some characters just have way too much. And I've been exploring the different characters kind of, you know, top to bottom from on the tier list and stuff, and getting different characters to master and playing some of the lower tier characters and then going to like a JP or something. You go, oh, like the 5 options I have here, like I can just keep falling back on the next one because my opponent just has to deal with it. And it's like, at some point, like, the opponent's not going to be able to deal with it. You're just going to be like, well, I have to take it, right? And again, something like Ken as well. Like, he's safe on so many things, and his pressure is so good on so many things. You have to, once he's in his prime spot, you have to worry about so much more. Versus a character like Lily, where it's like, well, if you're kind of at OD Spire range and she's got a Windstock, you have to worry about that. But also you can block and just drive reversal her, and she's at the disadvantage because she's just wasted a bunch of resources. But it's like you feel some of the limits of these characters in those interactions and stuff, or on the lower end. And it's like, man, there's just some of that stuff needs to be toned down with top tiers, I think. It's like, it's too much, man. It's like, I knew the counters for 4 out of the 5, but he had the 5th one ready. It's like, well, I mean, okay, well, I lost then, right? Like, what else am I going to do in this situation other than lose? Like, I can't beat that, right? So it's, yeah, there's a lot to that, though.
Yeah, and so part of this begins to go to well, you're comparing a grappler character versus a rushdown character, and how many options do you want to give a grappler character in this scenario? Because at some point they're so different that if they can get in as easily as Ken can get in, that's, I mean, although Ken is enjoying the best like living his best life when he gets in too, right? So there is that, especially with the corner, like we talked about.
It's the old adage of grapplers are not allowed to be really good, but Ken, Akuma, yeah, fine. Let them be ridiculously good. It's because they're the enemy that we were already comfortable with, that we know. And
we're not comfortable though, because we are saying that Ken needs to be toned down, and that when Ken gets in, it's too easy for him to get in, and he can do too much once he's there. And we have established that in the same capacity that we know would be a problem if a grappler got in, because their abilities are just that much more cut and dry, black and white. They're hitting you with a command grab. It's doing this much damage. Whoa!
It's the old Capcom design philosophy. Again, grapplers, traditionally, you're not allowed to have grapplers be really good because they make the game, really not bad, but it's a really rough experience for people. But again, it's like, well, Akuma can just be broken in every game, and it's fine.
Rushdown is completely okay by the community standards and by Capcom standards. Like, Rushdown's a one thing that the community almost never complains about. They'll complain about zoning, they'll complain about grapplers. Rushdown it's funny. It's like the golden child of our community. It's like, if you have Rushdown and it tends to be too dominant or too strong, not as many people complain. It's quite interesting.
Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, where you have the best characters of history in Street Fighter are the ones that are able to do that. So fair enough. But I will say that, again, mental stack, well, it should cost more resource to have more potential, right? So when I think about Ken, you've got the threat of just the standard threat that everybody has. They could dash forward, they could jump forward, they could DI. But then he's also got the threat of his low forward being as good as it is. He's got his drive rush, which isn't the best in the game, but it's pretty good. He can follow a slow-moving fireball behind his drive rush. That is an incredibly powerful maneuver for someone to, like, if someone can do that, I think there's an example of that needs to be a little more nerfed, that situation, and maybe it's specifically for Ken and a few other characters. Jury can do it too.
Ken should not have that. Like Ken is not a character known for tossing out a fireball and following behind it and getting a bunch of stuff from it. Like, that is not who Ken is. Like, if Ryu has that, sure. Like, Ryu's a fireball master. That's what he should be. Ken's fireball is supposed to be inherently weaker than pretty much every other character's fireball, except for like a Sakura or something like that. And for Ken to have that, like, that does not fit his design motif at all. Like, Ken is a rush down, crazy kicks, mix up character. For him to have that is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, and it feels like a fairly strong neutral skip in this game, and I do not like neutral skips. I mean, if you're going to give them that, they better have a lot, they better cost a lot to do it, or there better be some risk to it. Jury can do it too, like I was saying earlier, but she has to first stalk the fireball. Even then, man, Juries get those fireballs pretty quickly, and then once it's there, so even Jury, I think it's a little much that she has this. But things like that add to the mental stack, or in that point, you're just like, I don't know what you'd even do. It's like, it's very difficult to stop them, and they're at that point going to be putting pressure on you or hitting you. And but back to the idea of mental stack. Ken has so many other things. He can Dragon Lash, he can Drive Rush, he can jump, he can DI, he can just regular his command dash, and everything in between. So a character like that has so many options that you need to be worried about in them engaging with you, versus other characters like you were saying, Steven. With Lily, I'm worried about, well, is she wind stalked? And if she is, well, let's get to this range and play that. Is she going to fire off the windstock game? Am I going to throw a fireball? And then are her normals scary at this range, and do I dance with that? And that's a fun Street Fighter experience, and it feels relatively fair. When it gets to be too many, I don't know, is the answer take away options from the characters that have way more obvious mental stack from neutral than other characters? Or is it make those options cost more for them? What do you guys think?
Yeah, make the options cost more, or tone down those options so they're not as good. So if you're like +2 on block in that scenario, maybe make it even on block or something like that. Like a frame here and there makes a gigantic difference in these games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think in an ideal world, the design philosophy should always be for fighting games. The effectiveness of a move or an attack should cost the right amount of resources or whatever, right? And I go back to something like Killer Instinct, which I really like, is they've got combo enders that are specific to certain situations. So you've got an ender that's like, this is my max damage ender, or this is my positioning ender, this is my corner carry ender, and they all kind of balance out with like, well, this corner carry is obviously going to give you less damage, and obviously the damage is going to give you worse positioning, but it gives you the max damage, right? And so generally, I think moves in fighting games should kind of try to follow that philosophy of like, if this move is this good, it should cost the right amount to be that good. And it should cost the right amount of resources to give you that effect, right? So like something like Ken's heavy Dragon Lash is like ridiculously good. Something like that should probably be reserved for the OD version, right? It's like you get right in. Is he plus or he's even on block? I think he's +1. He's heavy.
+1 on heavy kick. Yeah, heavy kick Dragon Lash.
Something like that should cost meter because you get so much out of it, and a character should not just be able to be like, well, I can just throw this out whenever, because then you've got, Yun and Yang dive kicks from AE, right? It's like, oh, I could just keep throwing this out and I'm advantaged every time. It's really hard to stop.
Yun
I don't have to
EX
waste
lunge
meter.
punch in AE is what
exactly,
I think.
Exactly, right? And that's why it's like, well, these moves should be the general design philosophy, in my opinion, where it's like, if you have a character that has a lot with their mental stack that they can throw at the opponent, make it cost the right amounts of meter, and make it actually have some kind of a drawback to use, because it's look, I want to get the better advantage, so I'm going to pay more. That's kind of the idea I think they should be going with.
Okay, so as I look at all these...
real quick, too, speaking of design philosophy, I hope that Capcom factors in the ease of use with some characters and adjusts the game a bit accordingly. Like, technical characters should traditionally be pretty strong to help offset the human error factor and, like, the research and the time and the execution that you need to put in. So, like, I would like to see characters like Dalsum and Aki get tuned up a little bit, because it feels like they're maybe a little bit too undertuned for how much effort is required to play them. Like, especially a character like Dalsum, who is a monster character to play in this. It feels like he could use a little bit more juice based on how insanely difficult he is to play.
Agreed.
So as we go through all of this, I think about, does it need to be a general kind of, there's a damage scaling reduction on Drive Rush, or there's all engaging moves that are +1 on block need to cost 2 bars of meter, or whatever it is. None of the stuff, including the mechanics in this game, are made the same. No two low forwards are really the same in terms of their utility and their like what comes afterwards, and their frame data necessarily on all those aspects. No drive rushes are really the same. So with that in mind, I don't think global changes for the most part are what we need here. I do think that because this game has been designed on an individual character and an even individual move level, these alterations should probably take place on an individual character, individual move level, not much in the way of global changes. Does that resonate with you guys, or do you think there should be global general changes?
I think there should be, like I said, the drive rush one does feel like applicable to me if they up the damage scaling on it, but that's one of the few things I would maybe change, and maybe drive reversals as well. You might beef those up a little bit more than they are, maybe make them like -7 or something, or maybe not cost 2 bars or whatever, maybe a bar and a half, something like that. There's a few general changes I would make, but for the most part, I think you're dead on, and Steven as well, that I would not make a lot of global changes here, because I think the game is pretty darn good. It's got a Game of the Year awards. It's a great game. And so don't mess with too much of a good thing, but tweak it on a more individual basis.
Fighting game of the year, I should say. But yes.
And yeah, that was like the core message of the story that I wrote, of basically just
Right.
we've kind of seen the general mechanics of this game evolve in very interesting ways since the beta to now, right? And you had stuff like early on in the beta, drive impact was ridiculous. It was overpowered. Nobody, even Xiaohai, couldn't react to it, right, during the first beta. Nobody's ever going to be able to react to this thing. You get way too much out of it. It's going to be a spam fest. And then after like the second or third beta, people started reacting to it just fine. And now it's like you hardly hear any complaints about drive impact anymore. And we kind of seen an interesting evolution through these different game mechanics over these last 6 months and stuff. So it's interesting to see that, and I think that people too often they accuse the game mechanics of being the issue when it's more on the specific character front. And so that's why it's like I'm outside of maybe drive reversal, which probably needs some better utility, although I'm kind of still wondering, like, if we explore that mechanic more, will it get better? Because we have seen stuff like that. We saw Perfect Parry is a great example. Up front, that mechanic was considered trash. Nobody wanted to use it. It's too hard to land it. Now people are saying, oh, it's broken, get it out of the game, it's ridiculous. And it's like, I don't think drive reversal will have that serious of a change, but it could definitely have some more utility that we just don't know about yet. But right now, at this current point in time, I would say if we're going to do any sweeping changes to the game for Season 2, maybe look at drive reversal. But other than that, I would just hit the characters, because I feel like the foundation that Capcom has built already, and the way that these mechanics work together with themselves and the sum of all parts is really good already.
Yeah, and so in the honorable mention kind of category, I would put drive reversal, tweaking that up a little bit, maybe making it just one bar. I am a little bit afraid of once people start using it more on offense to keep people cornered, things like that. It's like, well, there might be some hidden juice there, but right now to spend 2 bars and to still get hit sucks. So it feels not quite where it needs to be. And then of course, this discussion can't really happen without bringing up inputs in this game. That is a video we've already done, which you can find a link to also in the description of this. We have talked about that before. Capcom has already attended to inputs to a degree. I still experience input problems like every time, like every other match I play online. A lot of the time I feel like it's just me, but in the same words that I think Punk used, he's like, my DPs are not even consistent, and I've been doing this in Street Fighter 4. I've always had DPs. All of a sudden now I'm getting other special moves and such. It's hard to quantify, and therefore it's hard to articulate exactly how this needs to be changed, but at this level of not that deep of resolution, I will say, similarly, I've been playing fighting games for a while. I have a certain level of consistency. I am definitely not perfect, and I definitely miss input sometimes, but it never happened before to the extent that it happens now. So maybe it's just me saying, oh, this has never happened to me before, but really, when it's people like Punk saying it too, I really do think that there's something about inputs in this game beyond just the obvious drive rush scenarios where it feels like the game eats it. That sucks too. But so yes, Capcom should continue to address the input issues, but I don't understand it on a level where I can be like, and it's specifically this, and this, because there's also the user factor that's clearly a thing too. But
yeah, you're talking to an Aki and a Lily player, so we know input issues really well. So
yeah, and also I don't think you're too. I don't think it's too risky to have that take, Velociraptor. I think if there's any one thing that everybody who plays Street Fighter 6 agrees on, is that the inputs need work.
No one wants to blame themselves.
Yeah,
right?
Nobody would ever say that it's not
never my
inputs,
fault.
Right? Yeah, so I think you're absolutely safe in bringing up that take for sure. It's not much of a hot take.
You know, I take it back. I do have a change implementation that they should do. Remember Google Stadia? Remember negative lag? I think that Street Fighter 6 should have predictive inputs for us. They should. So if we do a quarter circle and we don't get that last forward direction in the quarter circle, it should predict, oh, that's probably what you were doing. Give it the fireball. All right, guys, that's all we have for this week.
We're all
Make sure you watch all our other videos
cheaters,
now.
Right? Yeah.
Tell us how good of an idea that was in the comments below. Do you guys have any final thoughts for the conversation, or was that the
Not going to
perfect
end it any
Christmas
better
bow?
than that. The comment section's going to be on fire here pretty soon. So,
Right on.
Like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you in season 2.